Anybody know how to define or how to explain time preference? It's how we as individuals or societies, it's how we as individuals or societies value time. Do you prefer things now or do you prefer things in the future? Are you willing to wait? It's as simple as that. The easiest example I have, when this was nailed into my head, when I thought about my sister. I use her for a lot of examples. If somebody gave my sister and me $100 each and promised to give us $200 next year, she would take the $100 today instead of the $200 next year. She would probably do it, take the $100 a day right now instead of $150 next year, or even $110. So what does that say about her time preference? She values now much more. She is not willing to wait. And there's a number of reasons for not being willing to wait. Sometimes you can't. So we use the interest rate to measure the value of time. It's the interest rate or the discount rate. And the higher the value of time or the higher your time preference, the more you're going to require to give up goods today. So you will see inflation reflected in a higher interest rate because it includes that increasing value. And you will also see countries or individuals with higher time preferences require greater interest rates. Okay, let's say you're going to do a project, a mining project or something. You get flown to, I don't know where, Africa or something like that. And you propose to put in, maybe it's a dam. They need water all the time. So you're going to put in a dam, you're going to work on this project, and you're going to evaluate the project because it has costs now, and you're going to get benefits in the future in this country, like 10, 15 years. So you're going to use an interest rate of some sort, 10%, because you want a return on your investment. 10% isn't going to be high enough in that country because of the time preference. People cannot afford to wait for benefits 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. In North America, we're rich. And we can afford to wait so that our interest rates are much lower. So you go to a place where they can't afford to wait, where eating and staying alive is of primary importance, and you don't see big investments. And the reason for that is because they can't afford it. The value of today is much higher than the value in the future. So to convince people to forego consumption today for consumption in the future is going to require interest rates of like 100, 200, 300%. You want to see huge, huge values. In a lot of cases, we as North Americans work for big companies and we go out in the world and we decide that, oh, we're going to, they could invest in this and plant trees and do all these kinds of things, and ultimately the project fails. And the reason is because of the time preference. People there cannot make those investments because they can't afford to. They cannot afford to wait, even 1 year for the benefits. So when you think about time preferences, you think about going to the bank and making investments. What interest rate are you willing to accept on an investment? And then you take into account inflation as well. Any questions about time preference or why that would, how that would affect decisions with resource management or investment decisions?
And in case, for example, a company buys like equipment and stuff like that, then we have it like counters and like, I don't know how to do it, like during the time they will calculate its amount.
That's more of an accounting thing. If big companies buy equipment, they amortize that equipment, or they write it off over a period of time because its value goes down over time.
Yeah, just to compare, so that you know, like Russian banks and Canadian banks, for the deposits, long-term deposits. In Russia, the interest rates nowadays is between 6 to 10%.
Really?
Yes, and in
Practically zero, yeah. So that was an interesting point. If you go to a bank and you do a long-term deposit in Russia versus Canada, the interest rate will be 6 to 10%.
Maybe I think it's because of the
But I think
inflation.
economy and the guarantees are lower in Russia because the economy can change. And
Yes.
so there are not so many guarantees that you will get the money.
So that brings us to what else affects? What else causes interest rates to be higher or lower? Risk.
Yeah. Right?
So yeah, you can invest your money in a Russian bank and be promised 10%, but guess what? Next year you might not get anything. So would you rather go with 1% in a Canadian bank or maybe 6% in a Russian bank? So all these factors affect the interest rates that we work with. And we use interest rates to value time, both in terms of our own investing and evaluating projects over time. So with respect to risk, what kind of risk do we have to consider? You said economic risk, right? The economy changes.
Currency risk.
Okay, that's another one. Political risk. I'm guessing you guys don't read The Economist. Anybody read it? Oh, yay, one person. Two people. Okay. Do you ever go to the back page and see the interest rates and all the factors? It's really cool to look at these interest rates because they've got, you know, they'll do maybe one hemisphere or something, but they'll do Africa and all these other countries.
IBBB2.
Yeah.
BB plus minus something like that.
Yeah, so you look at the interest rates and it'll say the rate in Canada right now is 3.4 or something like that. You know, they'll give you the prime rate. And then you'll go to places like, oh, I don't know, Syria or something, and Iraq, the places where there's political instability. And you'll see interest rates of like 117% sometimes. Huge. So you think, man, why don't we invest our money there? Well, because you're likely not going to get it back. So it's interesting to see, you can look at the interest rates and you see a really high one, and you think, what's going on in that country? And usually there's political unrest or something going on. Okay, what other kind of risk? You guys in agriculture should know.
Environmental risk.
Yeah, huge. Environmental risks. There's risks of in forestry, there's fire, insects, blowdown, flooding, agriculture, flooding in Saskatchewan lately. Locusts, I don't know, we haven't had locusts for a long time, but there is a risk of loss that has to be covered in terms of, if you make an investment, you're going to need to get something back. You know, do you need 10, 20% on your investment? As this risk goes up, you're going to want a higher percentage back because to cover the risk of loss, because you might not get the money back. It's funny, if you go to a bank for a loan, so you want to buy a car or something, and you have a bit of a dodgy credit history, where else can you go for the money?
There are the companies, private companies.
Yeah. What kind of rates do those like Money Mart and those people charge?
Yeah, like,
Yeah, why is that?
I feel like they're already doing bad credit, so you're gonna keep doing bad credit.
Yeah, well, there's a risk, right? They're willing to give you the money, but they need to stay in business. And because half of their people, half of their customers default, they make sure that they get their money somehow. So you actually have to pay a higher rate because you have a greater risk of defaulting. So it strikes me as it's sad that the people without money get charged more money, the money they don't have in the first place. But that's why. It's because the risk is high and those companies have to cover that risk. Okay, the other thing I guess we could add in here, last one, is opportunity cost. There are opportunities, and if you make an investment in something, you want to know what the other opportunities are. So you're going to evaluate the more opportunities, the more you're going to be demanding of the interest rate. Now, when I talk about interest rates and discount rates, I'm talking about two things. One, the published rate, And that's typically what we're dealing with. You go to the bank and you get a rate on a car loan or a mortgage, or you get interest in the bank. But there's another interest rate that is something that we require or you will require. You have to come up with some rate to evaluate an investment. So you might say, well, these are the costs and these are the expected revenues. That's got nothing to do with the published rate. What you need to do is say, well, I want to evaluate my expected revenues and make sure that I get at least 10 or 15% back on that deal. So that's not the published rate. And so we'll talk a little bit about both. Okay. So this is what makes up what we call the interest rate formula. So, yes, you have to deal with formulas. What's that? It's just a simple way of doing it. The formulas are easy, actually. Maybe we do that next. Did you look at the sheet? Did anybody look at that sheet I put up yesterday? Yeah? Any questions about it? It's fairly simple. All you have to know is your y to the x button, you'll be fine. Ultimately, it's the simplest thing. We have time. This is a timeline. This is value, positive and negative. And we have a number of different investments that we can look at. You make an investment, you could look at it as a negative, and you get a return in the future. So in a case like this, where you have a cost, or the investment, and then the return, you're hoping the return is going to be bigger. N is the length of time that it takes that investment to mature. And what we need to do, always, is compare values in the same year. You cannot take $100 next year and compare it with $100 today. If you did, the result would be negative, assuming that the interest rate was positive. If the interest rate was 0, you can do that. So what we need to do is compare all values in the same year. So that means we have to either adjust this investment out into the future, or we have to take this return and bring it to the present. Or you can meet in the middle, it doesn't really matter, but you need to compare values in the same year. We like to do it in this year, the present, so B0 would be the value in year 0. And it's because we know this economy, we know this climate, we know the interest rates and our preferences right now, so it's easier to do it now. So we've got B0, the value in year 0, N is the time. We're going to select an interest rate by which to evaluate our investment, and we could call this value in the future Vn, so the value in year N.